Welcome to Living Fully. Each episode is a chance to talk about mental health in a way that's simple, honest, and helpful. We'll share stories, tips, and tools to help you feel supported and feel your best. I'm your host, Catherine Hertig. Men's mental health is talked about more these days, but that doesn't always mean it's easier to ask for help when you're struggling. Whether it's the pressure to be the provider or the belief that you have to handle everything yourself, getting support can feel harder than it should. In this episode, I'm joined by counsellors Sarah Rosenfeld and Joel Zimmerman to talk about why that is and how identity and expectations shape men's experiences with mental health. We'll look at what happens when the usual coping strategies stop working, what getting help can actually look like, and how counseling can strengthen your ability to handle life's challenges in a healthier way. A couple podcast all-stars, Sarah and Joel. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
And yeah, we're talking about a lot of big things today, really broadly, men's mental health, but also how identities are formed within that, whether that's the labels that we give ourselves or the jobs that we have, and kind of like the pressure and stress that comes with that. So if you are just listening, Sarah, Joel, tell our audience a little bit about yourselves.
Sure thing. Okay. My name is Sarah. I am one of our counselors here at the Calgary Counseling Center. I also work a lot with students, so I help support our student programs here at the center, so our internship and our residency, and I get to do lots of other fun things by being here at the center because this is a growing dynamic place, and so I get to be in the community sometimes. I get to work with Joel other times. I get to do lots of different things, but that's just a little bit about me.
Excellent. Joel, how about you?
My name is Joel Zimmerman. I'm also one of the counselors here. I'm a registered psychologist. That is a role, a title that I get to kind of keep on
part
the idea
of your identity.
Identities and titles. Yeah, but I'm a counselor here. I hold a caseload, and I also work with training students. Big fan of coming in here and talking about this and talking about these kinds of discussions. I think that's something really cool that we get to do. So
excellent. So when we talk about men's mental health, that broad idea, what do you think we often miss in the conversation?
Well, I'll start. I think the first one is that I think people sometimes shy away from having the discussion about men's mental health. I know I do, as someone who is often asked these kinds of questions as a male in my role. And just that idea that somebody who does get to work with different populations, I never want to paint anybody in a box. I never want to put labels or ideas onto somebody. But the fact of the matter is there are commonalities that people do see. And again, those commonalities are not to prescribe a certain way of being, but I think the idea that there are common experiences, that there are people that have them, that the way they experience life and the way that they react sometimes, and discussions like this, I think, shed light on and open up the opportunities to really normalize and make what is sometimes a really isolating and maybe even ostracizing experience, just shed light on it and make it normal and make it easier to get help.
That I would think that is, even the label of like men's mental health, women's mental health, like everyone doesn't necessarily fit the same in those categories.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I would add that. I mean, just to what you have said and what Joel mentioned, there's a huge complexity here. So when we're talking, right, there's some things that we can provide as guardrails, conversation starters, give you some information, but I think we have to recognize that every person who experiences something related to their mental health, it's going to be unique to them. And that we never want to take that away from the conversation. Mm-hmm. That's a big part of helping people navigate is we want to help them access some support that really is tailored to how they want to be seen, heard, validated, and supported.
And so in your work with men, does this idea of identity and how they kind of define themselves, does that come up?
I think absolutely. I think that one of the complexities I think that maybe we'll bring into this is like the idea that no person that comes into counseling is a siloed individual. I think the Calgary Counseling Center does something really not unique, but we take a family systems approach to everything that we do. Every person exists in a system. So even if we're talking about men's mental health, really we're talking about all of the people's mental health that might exist in a person's system. Their family and their friends, these all kind of intertwine. And so, yeah, the identities that people kind of bring into their relationships, who am I in comparison to these people that I might go to for help, matters a lot, right? If you do feel like your relationship is, I am somebody who is to look out for or provide for these people, it might be harder to reach out to those people and get help because you don't want to burden them, or you don't want to scare them, or you don't want to make them feel like you don't have some, a monicum of control that your identity might say that is important. So I think that's where I think identity kind of comes into this discussion in my eyes.
Yeah, no, I think Joel's raising something really important there. In my work with men, that piece around identity, being the provider, being the person that people come to for support, makes it difficult for them to be on the receiving end of that support. And so it's really important, I think, in our role as counselors to be able to acknowledge the difficulty that poses, but also the strength that it takes for them to know, well, I can't actually go to these people for that necessarily to the depth that I would if I were to come and talk to a counselor who's a trained professional to support me through that. But it's also helping normalize that people need support from time to time. And I think, especially if you're dealing with people that are always the ones that answer the questions, solve the problems, how do you then help it be okay for those people to say, I need some guidance here. I need some support. I need to throw some ideas at the wall and get somebody to listen to me or validate my experience.
Mm-hmm. So if with the men you're working with, they've already obviously made that first step, like they're in the room, so they recognize that they want to make some kind of change. Do you still have to kind of break down some of those barriers of the resistance to ask for help, get help?
I would say it's once they're in the office or in the chair or however you want to describe that, It's not so much that, it's about this piece for me, and I don't know what you would say, Joel, around this piece around vulnerability. So there can still be performative elements in the counseling space where they're still trying to show their counselor they're in charge, they're managing it. And so in the work, and I think the work that I've been able to do successfully with men, it's being able to help them realize that I see them that way, but that it's okay for us to explore these other things because that actually might lead to more strength and better resilience and ability to manage that when they have more awareness or understanding of those components. But that for me has been something that's been interesting. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, this is exactly one of those places where we'll say that that's not unique to men. Getting in the space is the easy part to some degree. It's sometimes the hardest part, but that's just where the conversation starts, literally. In my experience, I think I am privileged in the sense that being a male in these spaces, I'm afforded a certain level of, we can talk about this. I think there is that ability when I do get to work with a client who kind of maybe strongly identifies with some of these male roles or some of these common themes, where I can make it like it's just two guys having a discussion, two guys talking. And studies show when it comes to men seeking mental health support compared to women or other people in general, men and women both do seek support, but what they seek in terms of where they get it. So men are more likely to get something from their kind of relationships at work or their relationships with kind of instrumental relationships that they have. So they're not their friends, they're their friends for a reason. They're their friends through something. They're not like somebody that they met on the street and struck up a conversation with. These are people that they've known because they work with them, or they're through their relationships through other elements of their life. And when guys have those, they often do feel supported enough by them. That's one of the reasons why I think men don't often seek professional mental health support, because they get some level of support. They usually say that's enough. It's the ones that don't have any of that or aren't able to feel that level of connection in those mundane spaces. But I think, so that vulnerability, again, I think I'm afforded a little bit of credit to get into, but it's still absolutely something that somebody needs to, accept that, support and help and change just even defining those terms. Why are we here? What are we talking about? What's going on?
Right.
And what are you looking for? Because very often, sometimes change is not something that is easily seen because they recognize that it's hard, or maybe they don't feel like they can do anything about it.
Yeah, you made a really good point. It's not something that just men experience. Like from my own counseling experience, that vulnerability is hard. But I guess any kind of change, any kind of transformation, it's not going to be comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I think, so I think kind of to go back to your kind of original question is, the ability to step into the space is kind of step one. And then make it worthwhile is step two. And I think that's kind of where it comes between the counselor and the client to negotiate and come to an agreement, an alliance, and through that relationship, figure out really what we're doing and how we're going to do it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that can be very, I want to say, by the book, if you will. Some people really want like quote unquote therapy that they read about or learn about and some people do just want to have a healing discussion. And sometimes it has to be named and sometimes it can be a little bit more fluid. But it does require somebody to step in and say some things that maybe they don't feel like they can say other places or figure out how to. I don't know what your experience has been, Sarah, but.
That's interesting. I'm really resonating with what you said about natural support networks and how for men, there are probably some natural ways or networks that they turn to. Mm-hmm. It's when it becomes a little bit more intimate, I would say, or it's not something that you're going to have a conversation with at the pub or playing hockey, that it becomes something where they're looking and searching for a little bit more of that professional.
But maybe you've had this experience where like someone, they're talking with us as counselors about some level, some topic, and inevitably ask the question like, do you talk about anybody else with this? And they say, no, I would never, I wouldn't, I wouldn't, I don't want to burden them with that. I wouldn't want to. And then usually you, at some point in time, also get to hear about how they've helped other people. They talk about this other person who brought something to them, or, this guy has this going on, or this person in their life, they told me about this. And I always I'm always so curious, like, well, and when they brought that up to you, did you feel burdened? Did you poo-poo them and go, don't talk about that stuff? You were there to listen, and that probably helped that person. Like most people, I find are willing to step into that and help. Now, if you don't have the headspace or you don't know what to do about that, absolutely, that can be challenging. I always just think it's kind of unique, and I wonder if you've ever had that experience where they're thinking, I can't bring this to somebody else because I don't want to burden them, but I'll do it for them. And there's that, again, like that helper mentality, that fixer mentality, that ability to step into those spaces because, like, I can take it, I can do it.
I feel that's, in some respect, like it's really universal. Like we talk about, or I've talked, to you guys about just how we treat ourselves versus how we treat other people. Yeah. You wouldn't talk this way to a friend. Why are you doing it to yourself? Kind of thing. Just that discrepancy. I mean, it's a silly question, but it's like, if it's so universal, why can't we recognize that everyone's okay with helping other people? I should be okay with getting help myself.
Because there's still a perceived weakness around not being able to keep it all together and manage it.
Yeah.
Even though we try really hard to understand that, we've had the experience of it, I think still at the end of the day, how are people going to perceive me? If I need help in this moment, will I be defined by that seeking of help? Will I be defined by that other person by being vulnerable in this moment? And I think we see people much more holistically than that. But there's a big fear, I think, being defined by that. Mm-hmm. And how will that change my relationship with other people, with my peers, with trusted members of my community?
Just the stigma.
Yeah, I think the stigma is still really strong. And that piece around the shame. Right. If I step forward, do I get defined by that moment? Does that then mean that I'm only that?
Yeah. I also think, just to go back to, like, if this is such a universal experience, that kind of we all understand that, everybody does this, but why can't I do it for myself kind of thing. So I think, shame, stigma still takes a lot of guts to step into. The reality too is that, like, our brains don't work like that. Our brains see our own perspective first, and we can only see past the end of our nose. It really is coming through in a counseling relationship, or the ability to say it, where someone does point that out. Like, would you treat somebody else the same way? Once you hear that perspective, it kind of, again, sheds light on this idea that we're kind of hiding behind this. But yeah, it is not something easily done, because our perspectives, it's natural to kind of take that. And it's hard to step out of your perspective and see another's. That's a lot of the work that I think we do in counseling, is helping people define different perspectives.
bringing in this idea of masculinity, I've been seeing more videos and stuff about like the alpha male and being that typical male figure. So does an identity like that, if someone resonates with that, is that also going to kind of prevent them from getting to that vulnerable place?
I think the discussion about like typical masculinity or masculinity and as an identity that, like you said, like, ascribe to, it's a really fine point because no one's sitting there pointing at it going like, that's me, like I do that. And like, but there are experiences that define some traditional characteristics that some people really value, right? This idea of being a helper or this idea of providing, no one realizes, I think, the impact of those kind of for the better or for the worse until they start to not be helpful anymore. I don't know if that's like an overly vague expression, but like it's all fine as long as everything works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It stops being fine when it no longer works, or at least like, the way that you want to show up no longer, is aligned with those people around you.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to be said about traditionality, and it's like if everyone's on the same page, go for it.
Exactly.
If you're not, then now we're in conflict and now we're having challenge.
Yeah, I think it's those expectations, and it's not just the expectations you have of yourself, but it's in
The
that
external expectation.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
So if there's flexibility in terms of how you can be seen in that external world, then you've got a little bit more leeway to play with. But if they're pretty defined and you decide that, or something happens, and you can't maneuver that I think is where the conflict arises. And then people are doubting, questioning, and then sometimes they hold more tightly to the identity that gives them relief and comfort, and they don't realize actually that that's maybe what's creating some of the problematic situations in their life. But it's those identities are pretty important.
Well, and I think if we define, I think like talking about like how identity and mental health coincide, I think that's an important starting point, because again, people sometimes misattribute what they do with who they are. You ask someone, well, tell me about yourself.
Yeah.
Like you started this conversation. And Sarah did it better than I did. But the first place I went to was, I'm a registered psychologist. Like that must be who I am. But, tell me about yourself is a big, broad question. And 9 times out of 10, if you ask somebody,
they're going to go with their career.
Bingo.
Yeah.
That's what you do. That's not who you are.
Yeah.
So why this is a big discussion and like where that intertwines with mental health, and I think that flexibility that Sarah's bringing in is because sometimes you lose your job.
Yeah.
Now, if you lose your job and that's your quote unquote identity, then who are you? Good question. Now you're in trouble, because if you haven't figured out who you are and you're not able to extend who you are past what you do, and you're no longer doing that thing for whatever reason, you're going to have a bad time, and you're going to be scrambling to either figure out what that is. So yeah, I think when it comes back to identity, understanding that like what you do is very different than who you are. And I think, again, traditional go back to, male roles and whatnot, but like the idea of like surnames, those are all professions. Our society has been built around this idea of what you do is kind of linked to who you are, because at one point in time, if you were the milkman, you were the milkman, and that's who you were for your town. And you've kept that name in some way, and it was even your surname, or where you came from was your surname. So like all of these things actually kind of are linked in a lot of ways in our psyche to who we are. But in today's world, we have evolved into recognizing that it's more than that. And if it isn't defined and you haven't stopped to think about it, then you can get yourself in trouble if you don't have the flexibility around that. Yeah,
like those things are fluid. So what happens with your work with clients, what happens when someone's main identifier, whether that's, a career or a sport or a relationship, when that ends, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you help them deal with that loss of identity?
Well, I think it's going back to what Joel said. If they're defining uniquely as that way, it's about helping grow the perspective of who they are. So he said it really eloquently. It's what you do. It's not who you are. But to actually work through what that means takes a ton of work. Well, who are you in the world? You can be that person on the street. If you define yourself as a helper and friendly and responsive, you can do all of those things. It doesn't have to happen in a workplace exclusively. But also, if you've only ever spent your resources, time, and energy in the workplace, because that's where you get that reinforced, it fills you up, and then that's no longer there. It's helping people bridge to where else can they be the way they see themselves, or how else can they contribute, or
without it being another thing you do external.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Do you dig into that by getting into their values?
That's one way.
Yeah.
That's absolutely one way. I think back to work that I've done with people who have been injured in the workplace. Workers' compensation, WCB is a role that we sometimes see ourselves helping. And yeah, people who have had long-standing careers, they've done lots of things in their life, but really we're talking about the end or a giant shift in their career.
Yeah.
And that is a big thing to wrap your head around. Sometimes one of the, we can talk about values as a way to kind of figure out, well, what next? But just highlighting some of the things that they have done in their life where they're relational roles. Maybe they are a parent or a sibling or a child themselves. Maybe they do have social relationships where they fill other roles. So again, those kind of slide into just, shifting one to another. Right? There's one identity and I'm just going to shift over to another, which can be its own problem. But again, the values behind that, why are those things important to you? So having discussions just around, again, perspective, like when somebody says, well, I've been doing this for my whole life, what else am I supposed to do? And then we ask questions like, well, what do you do in your free time? Or what are those things that bring you a lot of joy or that you enjoy doing? And they hear their identities kind of come out from that, or what other things they identify with. That perspective then kind of opens up and sheds some more light on some different opportunities.
I think that ability to be flexible and see yourself as more than what you currently are is a big part of what you do in the counseling space. I also would say that when I've worked with people in similar situations to what Joel describes, there's a lot of work we need to do on actually letting go of that identity, of grieving that identity, and of actually starting to think about what other things can I be. So as much as people think it's just something they get over, I think that's where therapy really can play a pretty key role of giving yourself the time and place to actually, what ways did this fill you up? And what were the great things about that? But what were also the things about that were problematic, that maybe didn't get looked at or weren't something that you explored, so that maybe when you do the next thing or you just decide where you want to go, you've got a little bit more awareness around some of the pitfalls, some of the things that work well.
Well, I think a lot of these, again, we're coming back to the idea of identity, like it is relational. It's again, like, who am I in relation to other people or other things, right? So that's a commonplace. It's easiest to talk about this, when we're talking about things like work, relationships, career, education, nationality, and things that we do for kind of our city, country, whatever. And sometimes those are later in life discussed, right? So the other element of this when it comes to identity, or maybe roles where they're no longer congruent and there's some incongruency that's causing some sort of distress. And that's where we see people coming into counseling, where because what they've been doing is no longer working for whatever reason. And I think one of the challenges, or one of the fun questions that I always love to ask when somebody talks about the thing that they're doing, the who they are that they're identifying with, and as no longer working, and I say, well, how did you get there in the first place? How did you start doing this? And sometimes you'll hear people say, like, I don't really know, I just kind of fell into it, or like it was an opportunity that came up and I just ran with it and I was really good at it for a long period of time. Some of these things fall into our lap and we never really spend any time asking, like, should I be here? Am I doing the right thing? Am I being who I want to be? I just ended up doing it. I never
it's not
questioned
really a
it.
decision.
Exactly. So the thing, when I talk about with younger people coming in who are experiencing some disconnect with kind of who they are, not sure, it's because the things that they're doing, that they're kind of linking with who they are, they're not making choices. They're other people's choices. They're other people's expectations. You should go and do this, be this, do this. That are linked to their identity, or they're doing things that make them feel like who they are. But those things are no longer working. And when you ask them, like, how did you get here in the first place? And they didn't really make a decision. If it's no longer working, then they would feel a lot of discontent. They would feel a lot of maybe even like resentment, because they didn't really choose this thing. It was put upon them, or they just kind of fell into their lap. And kind of redefining that, I think, even from an early age, in that kind of identity formation stage of life, is really important to do.
I also think, Joel, that though it happens when things in life happen. So if people decide to become parents, or they're in an unfortunate accident, those things that may have actually aligned and worked, I don't know, things start to shift because your priority and your focus changes. And so when you're spending more time doing something other than what you thought you were going to be doing or that you previously had done, it opens up opportunities for people. And then they start to have maybe tension in the role that may have actually worked before, may have been aligned even. But these big things can happen, right? Parenting is a huge change. Being single and then being in a relationship is a huge change. Moving cities is a huge change. There's all these developmental things that happen that we kind of just assume, well, I'll just keep doing what I've always been doing. But actually, there's a process that goes into that. Yeah. And there are choice points along the way or things that stop making sense, stop having meaning.
Right, or things that like traditionally worked in this one setting.
Yeah.
Okay, to speak more generally, I think we can talk about ways that I'm going to say men show up, sometimes cope with experiences as being external versus internal.
Okay.
Sometimes, and again, I don't want to speak in generalities, but I'm going to. When we're forced to cope with challenges, externalizing is going outside of ourselves. So that's coping mechanisms that might be external from kind of thinking inwards, and it's going outwards. At the best, that can look like doing, distraction activities, doing things where we're focusing on other things. Sometimes those are healthy distractions. Sometimes they're unhealthy distractions. Everything from working too much or working out to going outside to see people, going outside of ourselves, as opposed to internal, where we're going inside ourselves and self-blame or doing introspection, very internal work. So it's common to look externally. So when some people come in having coped with strategies externally, I go to my people, I go to my places, I go to do the things that make me feel good. For whatever reason, their change has made one of those or all of them vanish or change, or they can't access those things anymore.
Right.
All of a sudden, your coping strategies are kaput, gone. You don't have them. So that's now a big change. And now you need to be flexible, to go back to that word, to say, okay, well, how did that work for me? Why did that work for me? What are the things that I can be doing? And can I get that elsewhere? As opposed to saying, well, I don't have, my guys aren't here anymore. So what am I supposed to do? I don't have them to talk to anymore. I moved across the country, or they moved across the country. What am I supposed to do? And they'll sit in that and they'll be rigid against that and say, well, there's nothing I can do. As opposed to being flexible to ask the question, okay, well, it was really nice to have somebody to talk to outside of the home. Where else can I get that? And that might be difficult, but those are conversation starters in counseling potentially.
Yeah. So like, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking like, obviously, if a problem comes up, we go to our typical coping mechanisms, right? Because that's what we know. And if that's not working anymore, I'm sure it's very common. Like a lot of people, like they wouldn't know what else to draw on. So
absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, is the answer like always counseling, or would you say like you need some kind of self-awareness to know where to look for different coping mechanisms? Do you know what I mean?
I'm going to bring the concept that, you were asking earlier about kind of the, getting in the chair is one thing, but kind of breaking down that level of like resistance or challenge or stereotype or whatever is sometimes the other. The expansion on that is someone saying, well, what else am I supposed to do? I don't know, is a really viable answer. They don't know what to do. It's not that you lack self-awareness to know where else to go. Yeah. You don't know what you don't know.
I remember like many times in counseling getting frustrated and like being posed a question like, I don't know.
Yeah. So that's not resistance.
Yeah.
That's a legitimate answer
Yeah.
that is now between you and the counselor to say, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
Now what do we do with it? Right? Let's try and find what else. And the common things about those kind of questions are sometimes the answer to I don't know isn't, again, resistance or stigma. It's, I don't think there's anything I can do about this. Like, I know that there are probably things, but it's not going to work. It's not going to work for me. It's a different situation. And that's, I don't know where else to go. Like, is there anywhere else I can go? Is there anywhere else I can go to talk to somebody or develop these relationships? I don't think it's possible. And that's, unfortunate, and might be true, but that's exploration and therapy. So I don't know, kind of answering that I don't know whenever I hear about that, like resistance, it's usually you don't know what you don't know. So the self-awareness probably brought you to the experience of like, okay, I need to do something.
Right.
Or I'm listening to somebody saying I need to do something. That's the starting point.
How would someone get to the point where they're asking themselves or recognizing I need to do something? Like that's what you said, Joel. They've got to the point where they know that they need to do something. What would they notice in their lives, I guess?
How would you know when you're starting to slip?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's lots of different things you'd probably notice. But I think one of the big things is if the things that you're doing aren't giving you a sense of relief or joy, or they're not filling the bucket any longer, those strategies probably aren't you working in the same way that they have in the past. So you're still going to do your socializing, or you're still going to do your walk. But at the end of that, nothing really changes, right? It's not giving you the perspective that we talked about earlier, or rejuvenating you, or getting you excited about doing something, or, oh, that reminder of somebody planning a trip actually made me want to go and think about how I can get some time off or get some time away. I think it's when it's this thing of it's a repeated cycle. It just feels more like rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. There's information coming in to help you be curious or ask another question or talk to somebody different. I think that would be some of the things that whatever you're doing, you're going through the motions, but you're a passenger in your life. You're not really living your life to the fullest at that point.
Yeah, I think, you're touching on that kind of that one general and yet really specific element of this. I'll maybe make it more general. I think the recognition of any of those things that you're doing, maybe your reactions, I heard you talking about, when you're not getting something out of it that maybe you want, you typically would. I think that atypicality, like what's no longer your typical way of reacting or being, and that's kind of outside of your norm, and not just growth, but it's no longer working. There's a misalignment. I think those are really things to be aware of. Like you're handling situations and you're like, I'm doing this much differently and it's not helping, right? It's not, I'm doing this differently and oh my God, look at all these great things. It's, I'm doing this differently and it's really not working for me. So when things are out of character and you're reacting in a certain way, you're going to that distraction that you know you typically wouldn't, or you're reacting to a person or a situation in a way that makes you not feel great about yourself, or other people are not making you feel good about how you showed up. When it's out of character, when those reactions or those actions are misaligned with like your values, you're doing things and you're like, that's not who I am. There's that real identity. That's like, okay, so there's something you value and here you're acting out against it. Or so I like to throw in terms like frequency, duration, and intensity.
Yeah.
One misstep, okay, like, maybe it's bringing your attention to something, but you're doing it regularly and it's lasting a long time, and the waves that it's causing, the disturbances are really intense. Okay, now we're dealing with something that might highlight, you're not coping in a healthy way. And then when others, right, I go back to the idea of when others bring something up to you, it's important to step outside your own perspective because we don't always see it. It's tough to put that on other people, to say other people need to be the litmus test for when I'm not okay. But if there are people in your life who do care about your functioning for a number of reasons, and they're saying you're not okay, what's going on here? We need to be able to listen to that. We need to be able to recognize someone sees something in me that's maybe out of character or that might be detrimental to ourselves. And it takes a lot of courage, again, to acknowledge that too and admit that maybe and saying, you're right.
Do the two of you see patterns in the men you're working with? Are they often coming in with like a clear understanding, like, hey, I'm depressed, I'm dealing with this, I'm anxious? Or is it more of just a, kind of a concept, like, I don't know, something's off, I need help, kind of like, do you guys see patterns in that? How are men describing why they're coming in?
I'll come back to the idea, like usually we see the coping strategies no longer working.
Yeah.
So it's people don't bring in their problems, they bring in the solutions that they thought they had that are no longer fixing or helping.
Okay.
So like the example, and I'm going to go just go straight into the hard ones, is like alcoholism or substance use. Please don't take this out of context. Substance use, alcoholism isn't the problem. It is a solution that someone came up to for another problem.
Right.
They thought that numbing it or using alcohol or substance to get away from that is the thing that was helping. It is a solution to a problem that is not helpful. So when someone comes in because of a coping strategy, that's what I mean. They're coming in because something that they were doing to deal with a problem has been highlighted to themselves by themselves or by others as that's no longer healthy, that's not working. You need to get that, quote unquote, fixed. Mm-hmm. There is still a problem that we haven't actually identified. There is some level of depression, anxiety. There is a reaction to something going on that we're talking about. Maybe that's within them, or maybe that's an external situation that they're dealing with, but it's usually they're not handling it in the best way.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
You see the same kind of
it's sort
patterns.
of, they research ad nauseum, they become informed, but now it's to the point where their partner's noticing they're going down these rabbit holes and it's really not helpful. And it's leading to more irritability, more anger. The thing that they're supposed to be alleviating is actually worsening. And it's other people around them noticing that, wow, something's changed, or you're really struggling. And then they actually do listen. They tend to reach out and say, I'm here because somebody's noticed that this isn't working all that well, or, I need to kind of explore this, or a pattern that used to be there that I thought I was managing is not managed anymore. I seem to have been tipped over and not really sure why. And then you explore what were the precursors that led to this. And there's usually there's a pattern, right? There's been additional stress at work or stress in the family, right? The relationship with dad that used to be okay, something's shifted there and dad's health has gotten worse, or the type of interactions they were having it's not meaningful anymore. There's more stress. I don't know. Joel, what were you going to say?
The other example is, like a financial issue. So I'm just going to work more. But now all these other things start to fall by the wayside. Now that becomes a problem. Yeah. Right? So there's always a reason why we're behaving the way we're behaving. And to our mind, we're trying to, do the best we can with what we have. And again, these aren't problems. These are solutions that people have come up with that are just unfortunately, they're not the right kinds of solutions. So I think that's a real pattern. But again, in the other kind of vein of like patterns that we see, attitudes towards how to address issues, like the idea of the fix it mentality. Like, I just want to fix it. And knowing that not all answers have fixable solutions. I'm rolling my eyes as I say that because it's not necessarily not fixable, but it's just that the solution isn't as black and white formulaic as one would hope. Right. And that might require additional skills that are not in their skill set. And so it's really, really frustrating when you try and take a fix-it mentality to a problem that takes a lot more nuance. Yeah. How you've shown up to problem solve for your entire life is probably the thing that got you exactly as successful as you are. Maybe that was an incredible boon to your success, and that you should be giving yourself all the credit for that. You are good at that kind of problem solving. Here is a new type of problem that maybe you haven't experienced yet. That's all. It's just a different fix it. You just don't know that that's a solution yet. Yeah. And that's a big thing to kind of wrap your head around. And so, that reaction that forms from statements like that, I think goes back to stigma, and it goes back to the challenge of this, right? It's not that like every problem has a solution, but like every problem can be figured out to some degree. It might not have been the solution that you imagined as A plus B equals C solution. Yeah. But there's something that's going to cause something to move in a different way. And so
like a wait and see. Like it's sort of, sometimes it's you need to be waiting, observing, noticing, and then be invited in, not take over. Yeah. So I think, as Joel said there, a lot of these things that led you to be successful. Well, if I take those things away, am I not going to be successful? And what we're saying is, no, those were great strategies, got you to where you need to be and maybe even want to be, but we want to add to that so that in more different scenarios and situations, you can wait and see. You can ask a question. You can step in and problem solve. Like, how do we build that repertoire?
Or be patient.
Or be patient.
Sit back.
And sit back and observe, because, sometimes being in the background and that person noticing you that you were there, they come to you later on when there aren't 15 people in a room, because you happen to be one of the people in that room. Right. I think I like that approach, is how do we just keep building people's abilities, their capacities?
Because that's something I think, or we hope that will resonate with men, is that counseling, it's not just sitting around, talking about your feelings. It's building skills. Yeah.
Well, and like different types of counseling exist. And again, when we talk about change-based counseling, we aren't just sitting around here talking about your feelings. I want to help people feel like they're moving forward, and I want to get fired at some point in time. I really look forward to that with my clients, where they say, I no longer need you, for now, knowing full well that they can come back when they're challenged in a new way next time. And I think that's the beauty of counseling sometimes, is we're not actually solving the problems for today. We're preparing for the solutions for the next problem. and the challenge, and weathering those storms. So yeah, like building up those skills and talking about the things that have worked and tweaking them, maybe sharpening those skills or figuring out new tools. Granted, the ability to come into a space and just have a space to say things that you can't, for whatever reason, bring elsewhere. Not that that's bad, not that like you're wrong for quote unquote not wanting to burden people in your life, because this is the other nuance of that discussion is like, I can't talk about this. And people say, of course you can. And it's like, well, no, you can't really talk about anything to anybody. You need to do that safely.
I agree with that. Yeah. I think you have to.
I think we should have that discussion too, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really important discussion.
Yeah.
So when we talk about reducing stigma, yeah, we want people to be able to talk about issues, their mental health, but not everybody will be receptive. Not everybody will be able to take the information you're providing and deal with it in a way that's helpful and useful to you. So you do need to be picky about who you share that with and what are the elements that would indicate this person's receptive, right? Are they listening? Are they paying attention? Are they safe? Are they not judging me?
That's a really good point. Yeah, the stigma reduction, it's not just about removing all inhibition when it comes to mental health. It's knowing who you can talk to.
Exactly, knowing who you can talk to, who are the right people. Because again, the initial discussions and the initial attitudes or themes that kind of come up is when we talked about like the fix it. But the other one I think is I don't want to burden anybody. I don't want to burden anybody with this. And again, this is not unique to men by any means. But that somebody may be listening to a podcast like this or seeing a heading on Instagram that says, you should be able to talk about your feelings. People it's taken out of context because you assume that means I can talk to anything about anybody and I should. But then when you do that and it blows up in your face because you picked the wrong person, it's your responsibility to be vulnerable, but it's also your responsibility to decide who is safe to be vulnerable with. Yeah. And especially the highest kind of prevalence of this, I think, is when we're talking about men in domestic violence situations, both people who have used domestic violence or have experienced domestic violence. We're preaching this idea of you should be able to be vulnerable with yourself, but you have to make sure that the people, places, or person that you're being vulnerable with are appropriate.
And that's really where sometimes the role of the counselors comes in, right? The therapist can help you determine, this person would be appropriate or this person wouldn't be appropriate. What are the conditions? What are the indicators that tell me this person will be receptive to that information? What are the indicators that tell me they wouldn't be receptive? In lots of different contexts, you have to kind of know your audience. You have to know who the recipient of the information is, and you have to know how potentially that information could be utilized. Mm-hmm. And so this is, I think, what happens is people take things as a blanket statement, and that can then be problematic. So then it's really important to work on that to kind of know, okay. And then it gets even more nuanced than that. Somebody could be actually a great person to go to, but reading them that day, they've had a bad day. They're giving off behavioral indicators. They're kind of being sharp or curt or not as open and receptive. That would not be a good day to go and approach that person when normally they'd be a person you could talk to.
For sure.
So it's also being able to notice, observe, pay attention.
Yes. Taking responsibility for, the right person might be a great person in general, but on this topic, they're not the right person.
Exactly.
Or at this time, I can tell that they're not the right person. Or I'm not able to, again, step into that space and keep my head on. I might, want to talk about this and I might want to talk about this with you, but I know that if I try and bring it up at the level that I'm at right now, it's not going to be helpful, right? So how we, quote unquote, unburden ourselves and how we go around this idea of like burdening other people and not wanting to put ourselves on other people. That's a really challenging sentiment that I think everybody can relate with, right? We pick and choose who we talk to and what we talk about. And we should. That's actually really, really healthy that we set those boundaries and those expectations with ourselves and others. But again, understanding the way to navigate that. I think that's an overgeneralized kind of statement, but that's what we're talking about here.
Before we wrap it, is there anything that I haven't touched on that we really should?
I hear us talking about access to accessing mental health in general and the common things that reasons why it would be difficult to step into these spaces, and also the common things that we do talk about, the things that we do hear, and the kind of commonalities of counseling for maybe men, but in general, I hear a lot of those themes.
So, a question for both of you: what's one or two things that you wish more men knew about coming to counseling, about getting help, about making these changes?
I think that it's okay, that it doesn't have to be forever. It doesn't have to be about your whole life, that it can be time limited. It can be the jumping off point for other things for you that you hadn't thought about before.
What about like the meaning behind it? Because I would think that there might be that idea, like, if I admit I need help, it means X, Y, Z about me.
Well, if you admit that your car needs an oil change, does that mean that you're a bad driver? Right? So you're right. Like, I think that I hear what you're going for is that, just because you come into counseling doesn't mean you're bad, doesn't mean you're broken, doesn't mean you're weak. I think it takes a lot of courage to face a challenge and say, I would like some help on this, or I might be in over my head, or, right? I think that's a sign of strength to be able to kind of do that.
And I'd just go back to what we said before. You don't have to necessarily advertise this to everybody. You can share it with the people that you think will be able to receive that information.
That's very true.
Again, we're not saying this is a public service announcement that you tell everybody you're going to counseling. You get to decide if you share that, with whom you share that, when you share that, so that it can be a private thing if you want it to be. It can be that you're an ambassador for men's mental health if you choose that. But it's not.
Yeah, there's a difference between like being ashamed of something and hiding it and
broadcasting it to the world.
Yeah.
Letting everybody know. Yeah.
And there's a lot of variability there. So I would just say you get to decide that.
Yeah. I'll also add from a practical component, I think it's important that people understand counseling is a service. That means that you should be able to get what you want out of it, and you, just like any other service, you're allowed to shop around for it. You're responsible for if you're not having a good time or if it's not doing what you want it to do, to speak up about that and go and do something different. Vote with your feet kind of thing.
Yeah.
One bad negative therapeutic experience does not mean it'll always be like that. And studies do show that when people have negative experiences in counseling, it decreases their likelihood to return to counseling.
For sure.
But really good counseling, when it can be hard to find sometimes, and it's your responsibility, you should go and find somebody that you gel with. And that might mean firing a couple therapists on your way to get to that one service that was really meaningful to you. And that takes a little bit of patience. And it's not easy to do.
One question around that quickly before we wrap up. So I know that we really emphasize this idea of feedback and counselors getting feedback from their clients. How do you encourage that? Because I know that can be an uncomfortable experience if, like you're saying, you want to not shop around, but like you said, get what you want out of the service.
Yeah.
So how do you encourage your clients to give that feedback, to say, hey, what you're doing isn't working. This process isn't what I thought it would be.
I don't think it always comes across that way. So in the language that you just used there, I think sometimes this has been really, really helpful, but I need a deeper exploration of X, Y, and Z, and that's been missing.
Okay.
So it's not always, sometimes I find that it's a thematic thing of, this has been really, really useful, but I actually need, and I think it would be helpful for me to explore this more. Can we go in that direction a little bit more? So you're course correcting. It's not necessarily always in each and every single session you're getting concrete, specific feedback. Sometimes that does happen. Okay. And then you can adjust, right? Yeah. I needed homework today and I didn't get that. I really would like that.
We're talking about this. I really need to be talking about that.
Exactly.
I need to be talking about something else.
But sometimes it's more of a thematic. I find these really, really helpful, but I think there's a deeper piece that I need to explore here with you. And can we kind of move in that direction? And do you think that would be helpful? And when could we do that? And how could we do that?
So it is more subtle, and it's what you as a counselor.
Yeah, we always just want to be helpful. Like, is this helpful? Yeah, and sometimes they say no.
Yeah.
That's great feedback. You're like, okay, so what am I missing? You know,
Right.
sometimes it is wait and see. Okay, you've given me some stuff to think about. I'm going to see how this applies and I'll be back.
Yeah.
I think everyone gives feedback. We just want that feedback to be before they leave. And I mean that generally, right? People are going to give her feedback when they decide to not continue counseling, not come back.
Mm-hmm.
And that's understandable. Maybe they got exactly what they needed, or maybe what they got didn't help. We as counselors just want to know that before you leave, so that we can try and make that amends, or try and shift or do something different. So the encouragement is to lean in and to say and speak up really for yourself,
Of
to
course,
say
yeah.
it's like, hey, this is not quite right. And counselors who are trained in receiving that feedback and eliciting it will be more than grateful to accept that, and will go to the ends of the earth to make sure that what they're giving is a valuable service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was awesome. Thank you.
It was excellent talk. You've been listening to Living Fully, a Calgary Counseling Center podcast. Thank you for tuning in. This episode was produced by Nick Here, Louisa Campos, Manuel Montano, Jenna Forbes, and by me, Catherine Hertig. A special thanks to Joel Zimmerman and Sarah Rosenfeld. To stay up to date on our latest episodes, be sure to subscribe. We're available in your favorite podcast app. Living Fully is a production of Calgary Counseling Center and recorded in Calgary on Treaty 7 territory. Living Fully podcast is not a substitute or alternative for professional care or treatment. Calgary Counseling Center and Counseling Alberta provide effective counseling to anyone in Alberta with no waitlist and no financial barriers. Find us online at calgarycounseling.com and counselingalberta.com. For help across Canada and the United States, call 211. If you are outside of Canada and the US, seek help from your general medical practitioner.